The rain had been falling for hours, turning the streets of downtown Los Angeles into glistening rivers that reflected the city lights in fractured golden shards. Keanu Reeves walked quietly along the sidewalk, his shoulders slightly hunched, his faded black jacket soaked through. The jacket wasn't a fashion choice. It was one of the few things he had kept for years, patched more than once. The kind of garment that carried memories only he understood. A baseball cap sat low over his brow, and a quiet scruff shadowed his jawline. Most people on this side of town wouldn't have recognized him if they passed. He didn't care. He had learned long ago that the less attention he drew, the freer he felt. It had been a week since he'd decided to buy himself something he hadn't had in years, a proper car. His motorcycle had served him well, but a recent accident on a slick road had left his ribs aching and his friends urging him to drive something safer. And though he could afford far more than the average person, Keanu was not the type to flaunt wealth. He had no interest in being followed by cameras or treated differently because of his name. He wanted the experience every ordinary person would have. So, he decided to visit a dealership quietly, without an entourage, without calling ahead, without revealing who he was. The dealership sat on the corner of Wilshire Boulevard, all glass walls and spotless chrome accents. Inside, cars gleamed, under showroom lights like jewels on display. The moment Keanu stepped in, the warmth hit him, carrying the faint scent of polished leather and new upholstery. He glanced around with calm curiosity, noting a sleek, midnight blue sedan tucked toward the back. It wasn't the most expensive model in the place, but it had a timeless elegance that drew him in immediately. A salesman in a sharp gray suit spotted him near the entrance. The man's smile flickered for a moment, then hardened into a professional mask. "Sir," he said with a glance that swept over Keanu's wet jacket, worn jeans, and scuffed boots, "the service area is down the side. This is the showroom." Keanu paused, letting the words settle. "I'm here for the showroom," he replied softly. The salesman hesitated, his eyes narrowing. "We don't keep used inventory here. These are premium vehicles, the kind of cars that require a certain budget." It wasn't the first time Keanu had been sized up and dismissed based on appearance. Fame hadn't shielded him from the quiet cruelty of assumptions. He simply gave a small nod and moved toward the midnight blue sedan. But the salesman stepped in front of him, blocking the way. "Sir, I think you'd be more comfortable at one of our partner lots," he said, his tone smooth but edged with condescension. "This might be out of reach." A couple browsing nearby glanced over, sensing tension. Keanu's posture remained calm, but his eyes, warm, steady, and quietly observant, did not look away. "Isn't it your job to let customers see the cars before you decide what they can afford?" he asked. The salesman gave a quick, humorless chuckle. "We don't usually have people in that condition looking to buy six-figure vehicles." Keanu could have pulled out his phone, shown his bank balance, or given his name and watched the man's attitude flip instantly. But that wasn't the point. He had no interest in teaching a lesson by bragging. Instead, he let the insult hang in the air and turned as if to leave, not because he was embarrassed, but because he felt a quiet sadness that even in a city where dreams were sold on every street corner, the simplest human courtesy could still be withheld. He was almost at the door when he heard a voice, soft, hesitant, but clear, call out, "Sir, wait." It wasn't the salesman. It was a young woman in a dealership uniform, standing near a desk piled with paperwork. She looked no older than 22, with dark hair pulled into a neat braid and eyes that carried both caution and kindness. She hurried over, glancing nervously toward her superior, who was watching with a frown. "Do you want to see that sedan?" she asked quietly. Keanu studied her face for a moment. She didn't seem to recognize him either, but there was no judgment in her tone, only the straightforward politeness he'd been expecting from the start. "Yes," he said simply. The salesman's voice rang from across the room. "Melissa, don't waste your time." She ignored him and walked toward the car, gesturing for Keanu to follow. And as they moved together across the polished floor, something in Keanu's chest shifted, an almost imperceptible weightlifting. Not because someone was finally willing to help him, but because in a place where pride and pretense ruled, one person had chosen to look past the surface. What he didn't know yet was that this young woman's life was about to intertwine with his in a way that would change them both forever. "A year," she said. She stared straight ahead at the rain. "Feels longer." She didn't mean to say the rest, but the truth had been building all morning, and some truths arrive like storms. You don't invite them, you just hold the roof. "My mom fell down our stairs last winter. Twice. I took the night shift at a call center, but the pay..." She shrugged. "This place offered opportunity. Mostly I alphabetize things and try not to make rich people uncomfortable. Does that work?" he asked, and she heard no mockery in it. "Sometimes," she said, "when I make myself small enough to fit in their idea of me." A silence. Not awkward, considering. "You didn't make yourself small today," he said. "I was tired," she answered, then corrected, "No, I was angry." She exhaled. At this idea that dignity is something we loan out like demo cars to people we think can pay it back with interest. They stopped at a light. On the sidewalk, a teenager in a soaked hoodie balanced 2 steaming cartons of food, hustling with the serious grace of someone betting on time. Keanu watched him pass in the mirror until the kid disappeared into a building. "Turn left up here," Melissa said. "There's a stretch with fewer lights." He did, the sedan gliding into a more open seam of city. The car felt like ease, like a sigh you'd been saving all day. She showed him the adaptive cruise, the lane assist, the hidden panel where climate controls hid like shy buttons. He learned it quickly, hands light, mind quick. No showing off, no floor at burst to prove the point. He drove like a man who understood that power means very little if you don't know how to hold it gently. Her phone buzzed, a message from Troy. "Back now." Another, seconds later, "GM wants the car on the floor for 1 p.m. VIP. Melissa turned the screen face down. The clock gave them 4 more minutes if she stretched the definition of 10. She guided him down a side street lined with jacarandas, lilac petals tattooing the wet asphalt. "Here," she said. "You can..." feel her breathe. He nodded, then let the car open just enough to show its spine. The engine rose, not loud but layered, a low velvet crescendo. She felt it in her sternum. He feathered the brakes, coasted, and the world, just for a brief, impossible moment, felt like it could be better than the sum of its petty calculation. When they pulled back under the portico, the rain had softened to a mist. Troy was waiting with the posture of a man rehearsing moral superiority in the mirror. Halpern stood beside him, smiling the way some men smile before they decide something you can't undo. "Well?" the manager asked, voice smooth as lacquer. "Did we enjoy our little joyride?" "It was a test drive," Melissa said. "It was unauthorized," Halpern corrected, his smile not moving. "And late." Keanu stepped from the car, hands visible, posture relaxed. "Thank you," he told Melissa, not theatrically, but with the quiet weight of someone who meant it. "You're welcome," she said, keeping her chin level even as the air sharpened. Halpern turned to Keanu. "We're unfortunately at capacity. For today. If you leave your contact information, someone can reach out when we have vehicles better suited to your needs." "My needs?" Keanu asked lightly. "Budget," Halpern said, letting the word sit there like a dropped napkin no one would pick up. Before Melissa could speak, the service bay door clanged, and a man in oil-spattered coveralls hurried out, leading a woman by the elbow, middle-aged, holding a cracked umbrella, panic in her eyes. "Please," the woman said in accented English, thick with worry. "My car. Brakes no good," They say expensive. I need to get to work. Troy made a disgusted little sound. Service is that way, he said, pointing. This area is for showroom clients. She is a client, the mechanic snapped, surprising everyone. And her calipers are chewed. She's got kids in the back some days. If she takes that thing out, it's a headline. Halpern's smile thinned. Then she shouldn't take it out. The woman folded. I can't lose my job, she whispered. I clean offices. If I'm late again, they... She stopped, ashamed of needing help in a place built to sell it. Keanu's gaze moved from the woman to the bay, then back to Halpern. The rain hissed on the concrete like a warning. He could have played the card now. Name, fortune, spectacle. He didn't. Instead, he walked to the service desk, pulled a damp wallet from his jacket, and said to the shell-shocked service clerk, Write up the repair order, parts, labor, everything necessary to make it safe. Put it on this. He slid forward a black card that drank the light and gave none back. And if you can, a loaner for today. A safe one. The clerk blinked, glanced at Halpern like a sailor seeking lighthouse permission. Sir, we can't accept, Halpern began. You can, Keanu said, voice still soft, but with a timbre that suggested he had learned long ago when to stop whispering. And you will, because a brake failure on your lot is a liability you don't want, and because sometimes the shortest distance between a problem and a solution is kindness. Melissa felt something in her chest break, and then set differently, like a bone reset without the splint of spectacle. The mechanic swallowed, then nodded to the woman, who pressed both hands to her mouth and began to cry. The tired kind, relieved and terrified of what gratitude might cost. Halpern recalibrated with visible effort. That is generous, he said, but we must protect against fraud. Identification? Keanu slid the card back and replaced it with a driver's. License laid face down, only the edge visible. He met Halpern's eyes. You don't need the name. Halpern flipped it anyway, and the showroom's fluorescent hum seemed to pause. His pupils pinched, then widened. Troy leaned in, lost the performative languor all at once, and stepped back as if the license carried voltage. Melissa didn't. Look. She was watching Keanu, the way he shifted his weight, almost disappointed that the moment had required revelation. The secret was out now. She saw the resignation in his shoulders. The lesson they had refused to learn quietly would now be learned loudly. Halpern inhaled, built a new smile from pieces of the old one, and extended his hand like a lifeline. Mr. Reeves, he said, rich with sudden warmth, forgive the misunderstanding. We'd be honored. Keanu didn't take the hand. Not angrily, just as if it were a prop from the wrong scene. He turned to Melissa instead. You know the car, he said. Would you mind walking me through the purchase process, if it's still available? Troy started to speak, but Halpern cut him off with a palm that trembled once before it stilled. Melissa is in inventory support, he said carefully. She can't close a deal. Then she can walk me through it, Keanu said, and you can close. Halpern nodded so quickly the gesture bordered on a bow. Of course. The service clerk returned with a loaner key and a repair estimate with numbers that would have made the woman faint an hour ago. Keanu signed, handed the key to the woman, and said, Please text the number on the repair sheet when you're done. Take your time. Drive carefully. Sir, she whispered, tears fresh as rain. How can I get to work safe? He said. That's how. She left with the mechanic, clutching the key like a passport. The portico air felt different. Now, as if the building itself were embarrassed by how quickly it had misjudged the weather. Inside, the showroom came alive in a new, awful way. Phones appeared like mushrooms after rain. Two teenagers at the water dispenser half whispered, half squealed. A man near the SUV display pretended to check tire treads while filming. Melissa felt heat climb her neck. She hated this part of the city. The way faces changed shape in the presence of someone famous. The ballooning need to be close to a story instead of a soul. Keanu seemed to shrink from it too. He removed his cap and pushed a hand through his wet hair with a quiet, "Whatever happens next," then focused on Melissa's voice as she led him to the finance desk. She explained options, not pitching, but translating. He asked questions that revealed two things. He understood far more than he let on, and he valued clarity more than leverage. Halfway through the paperwork, Halpern reappeared with bottled water and apologies. "Mr. Reeves, we'd like to offer you the Founders Edition. Unique badging, priority service, concierge." "I want the car I drove," Keanu said. "Nothing special. Fair price. Spare set of winter tires. Donate the concierge fee to the Service Tech Education Fund you don't have yet." Halpern laughed uncertainly, then realized it wasn't a joke. He scribbled a note to himself no one would read. While the printer chattered, Melissa's phone buzzed again. A text from her sister. "Mom's meds. Clinic says Friday deadline." The number burned. She slid the phone away, swallowed the helpless taste, and returned to the checklist aloud. Keanu watched her for a beat. "Is your mother okay?" he asked, so gently she nearly lied to make the concern go away. "She will be," she said. "Eventually." She wished she had said, "We are holding together by receipts and stubbornness and the grace of a nurse who looks the other way at closing time." The printer jammed, of course, and she excused herself to fix it. In the copy room, she let her forehead touch the cool cabinet for 2 breaths. When she straightened, Troy was in the doorway, halfway between smirk and plea. "You're making this complicated," he whispered. "If you'd let me handle it, I'd have had him in a V12. "And out of patience," she said, clearing the jam. "And you'd still be yourself," he rolled his eyes. "You don't move up by saving people's feelings." She looked at him then, really looked. "Maybe I don't want to move up to wherever it is you are." When she returned with the warm stack of papers, Keanu was alone at the table. Halpern stood 20 feet away, speaking urgently into a phone, gesturing at the ceiling. The showroom had developed a respectful distance around the man at the finance desk, the way a tide shapes itself around a rock. "We're almost done," she said. He nodded. "You were right about the brochure tag," he murmured. "This one disappears." "Just the way you want," she answered. He signed the final page, set down the pen, and then did something that rearranged the room. He stood and bowed his head slightly toward her, an old-world thank you in a fluorescent world. She blinked at the grace of it. Halpern reappeared with a fob dressed in a ribbon meant for social media. "If we could get a photo, Mr. Reeves," he said smoothly. "Handshake? Keys. The team would—" "No photo," Keanu said not unkindly. "Let the day breathe." They began to walk toward the car. Phones rose anyway. Melissa felt the scrape of 100 tiny intentions. She quickened her pace to draw some of the attention, the way a teacher steps between a child and a storm. That's when the doors whooshed open again and a woman strode in wearing a blazer the color of thunder. Short hair, eyes like polished stone. Corporate. She moved with the purpose of someone sent to fix an optics problem before it made the evening news. "Mr. Reeves," she said, flashing a smile that could unzip a safe. "I'm Regina Cole, Regional, Director. We're thrilled." Keanu's stride slowed, patience thinning but intact. "And," Cole continued, "we'd love to honor our newest initiative with you. It's called Open Roads. We partner with a public school to bring students to tour the showroom, meet our leaders, learn about automotive careers. If you could lend your name, a visit, perhaps a message?" Melissa felt the irony slip a dagger between her ribs. She pictured the girls who would come, the boys, the teachers corralling hope on a field trip budget. She pictured the woman, whose breaks would be safe tonight because a stranger refused to let the day become smaller than it needed to be. Keanu looked at Melissa, not the director. The question in his eyes was simple. Is this real, or a press release wearing shoes? She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her face, apparently, told the truth she lived with. Sometimes good ideas arrive late to cover earlier sins. Keanu turned, back to Cole. I'll visit, he said, but not for a photo, for the kids. He paused, then added, start by opening your service scholarships to anyone your sales team dismisses in the first 10 seconds. Cole's smile flickered, the power grid dimming and catching again. We can discuss parameters, she said. We just did, he answered. He reached the car, paused with the door open, and said to Melissa in a quieter voice that seemed to tuck them beneath the noise, You kept the day honest. I just did my job, she said. You did more? He replied. That matters? He slid into the driver's seat. Before he closed the door, he looked up at her with an expression that made the whole odd human drama of the past hour condense into a single lucid point. We make places by how we behave in them. Take care of your mother, he said softly. Please. The door eased shut. The engine woke. The sedan rolled forward and then away, disappearing into the soft, forgiving rain exactly as promised. Behind Melissa, Halpern exhaled and tried to turn to Cole with the swagger of a man who'd managed the day, but there was a tremor in his show. Troy muttered something about missed upsell. The service clerk grinned privately down at the repair ticket and wrote paid in ink that would outlast them all. Melissa stood very still in the scent of wet concrete and new leather. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steadied, as if some hidden seam in the world had held when it might have torn. She touched the empty air where the keys had been and thought of the woman driving a loaner to work. Brakes good, future a little less brittle. Her phone buzzed one more time, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. Then she did, a voice, gentle. Melissa, this is Joanna from St. Gabriel's Clinic. Someone just called about your mother's balance. It's been taken care of. Melissa closed, her eyes. The showroom noise dropped away. I didn't. Who? They asked us not to say, Joanna said, warmth wrapped in discretion. But they also asked me to remind you to sleep. The call ended. Melissa stared at her screen, at the tiny, improbable mercy glowing there. She pressed both hands to the cool edge of the desk until the room steadied. Then she breathed out a laugh she hadn't earned, and a gratitude she would spend the rest of her life paying forward. Outside, the rain paused, as if the city were listening. Inside, the regional director cleared her throat and said to Halpern, too brightly, Let's talk scholarships. And somewhere just beyond the glass and the gawking and the 1,000 tiny ways people rank one another, a midnight blue sedan took the long way home, content to be exactly what it was, strong enough to return without needing to be seen. Melissa's hands trembled just a little as she lifted the chrome door handle and let the midnight blue sedan exhale its leather-soft breath into the showroom air. The cabin felt like a quiet library. Stitched seats, brushed aluminum, the faint, expensive whisper of new upholstery. Keanu stood beside her without the swagger of a man used to doors opening. He waited, polite, observant, present, as if the car, too, needed to be seen before it could be wanted. May I? He asked. Of course, Melissa said, stepping back. She watched him ease into the driver's seat, not with hunger, but with respect. People came in every day to conquer cars, slam doors, tap on screens like game consoles, laugh too loud so the showroom could hear what money was supposed to sound like. This man sat like someone greeting an old friend. He ran his fingers lightly over the steering wheel, then rested them, listening to the silence. Across the room, the gray-suit salesman, name tag Troy, made an exaggerated show of checking his watch. Melissa ignored him. She'd learned to cultivate selective hearing in the last year, ever since her mother's second fall and the bills that followed like vultures. The dealership had hired her on a probationary basis, inventory liaison, a title that meant everything and nothing. Paperwork, keys, coffee runs, email blasts, rearranging floor mats, catching blame that slid downhill. She wasn't allowed to close sales. She wasn't even technically sales, but she was allowed to be human. Or that's what she told herself each morning when she pulled on the navy polo and promised to be braver than yesterday. "What draws you to this model?" she asked, honest curiosity warming her voice. Keanu glanced at the rearview mirror, where his cap brim cut a neat horizon. "It looks like it knows how to disappear," he said, "but it's strong enough to come home." Melissa smiled in spite of herself. "That's the brochure's secret tagline. You found us out." He chuckled, soft and genuine, and she felt the room tilt just a little toward possibility. Troy clapped his hands once, sharp as a slap. "All right. Fun's over. We have VIP appointments at 1. He walked toward them, smile lacquered back, on. "Sir, we appreciate your interest. If you'd like to leave a number, we can—" "Keys," Melissa said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "He should test drive it." Troy's eyebrows leapt. "The car is reserved, and he hasn't been pre-qualified." Pre-qualified. The word landed like a locked door. Melissa had heard it used to funnel people out of the showroom. Mothers who wore the day on their sleeves, men whose hands betrayed a life of work instead of air-conditioned meetings. Pre-qualified meant, "We've decided who you are before you've had a chance to show us." "I can leave a deposit," Keanu said, calm as a lake. "On what card?" Troy asked, already fishing an iPad from his leather folder, the gesture practiced for intimidation. He let his gaze skate over Keanu's jacket again, then lingered like a challenge. Before Keanu could answer, the glass doors whooshed, and the general manager strode in, elegant vulture in a navy suit, tie pinned with a tiny silver crest. Mr. Halpern. He had the careful smile of a man who'd spent years closing deals by making people feel just enough smaller than the car in front of them. "What's the delay?" Halpern murmured, not really asking. His eyes found Keanu, measured him, and did the cruel arithmetic. "Sir, welcome. This particular model is indeed reserved. We'd be happy to guide you to our sister lot. They'll have something comfortable." Melissa felt the old fear rise. Rent due, mother's prescriptions, the slip of paper from the rehab center with a bright red balance due stamp. But behind it, something sturdier stood up. She heard her mother's voice from before the falls, before the quieting of a quick mind. "Don't you ever apologize for seeing people clearly, Mel. It's the only honor that costs you nothing and changes everything." "It's not reserved," Melissa said. "It's tagged for demonstration, and the lot insurance covers escorted tests." She looked at Halpern. "I already checked the board." A tiny silence expanded, dangerous and electric. Halpern studied her as if she were a scuff on the floor. Troy made a sympathetic face, the kind he used before throwing a junior under the bus. Keanu broke the tension with a gentle pivot. "If it helps," he said, "I'll be quick and careful." The manager shifted tactics. He adopted concern the way some people put on a scarf, lightly, for effect. "We have a brand to protect," he said. "These vehicles aren't for everyone." Melissa stepped forward before she could talk herself out of it. "They're for customers," she said. "Which he is, until he proves otherwise." Something tightened in Halpern's jaw. He turned to Troy. "Get the keys. Melissa, you ride along. 10 minutes. Keep it off the highway." Troy hesitated, then fished a fob from the wall cabinet and slapped it into Melissa's palm with a showy sigh. She felt the cool metal like a dare. Outside, rain beads jeweled the sedan's paint like dew on midnight. Keanu held the passenger door for her first. The chivalry landed quietly. She noticed, because no one at this job ever did that unless there were cameras. She slid in, clipped her belt, and tried to slow her breathing. He took the wheel, adjusted nothing with the fuss of a man needing the world to be tailored around him, and guided the car out of its cradle and onto Wilshire as if it had been waiting for his touch. The city blurred into a softer self behind. Those double-pane windows. The engine hummed, not a shout, but a promise. Melissa watched his hands. They were steady, but she could see a micro-hesitation when a bus veered too close, a flinch so fast you'd miss it if you weren't looking for the ways people remember pain. "You ride?" she asked gently, nodding toward his posture. Upright. "Ready." "Used to," he said. "Road reminded me I was mortal." She smiled. "Mortality. Our most persuasive sales rep." He glanced at her, surprised she'd risk a joke. The smallest grin brushed his mouth, then vanished as brake lights bloomed ahead. He eased the car down with a grace that made Melissa think of piano players, how their wrists never look tired, even when the music demands everything. "How long have you been here?" he asked. The next morning, the sun rose reluctantly, smudged behind a pale veil of clouds. Melissa's alarm went off at 5:45 a.m., the same shrill sound she'd learned to hate but couldn't risk silencing. She reached for her phone on the bedside table, but before her fingers touched the cool glass, she saw the envelope taped to her door. Her apartment building was the kind where envelopes on doors usually meant rent reminders, overdue utility notices, or worse. A landlord's thinly veiled threat to find someone who pays on time. She peeled it off with careful fingers, already bracing for the sting of bad news. But the paper was thick, expensive, not the recycled grainy stock the building manager used. Inside was a folded sheet with handwriting, real handwriting, in dark blue ink. "Melissa, sometimes the right thing leaves no trace in the day except in the people it touches. Consider this just a small thank you for letting the day be what it should have been." Behind the note was a cashier's check. The number was enough to cover her mother's next 2 months of care, and then some. Melissa sat down on the edge of her bed, her knees suddenly weightless. For a moment she stared at the ink until the lines blurred. She could hear her mother's voice in her mind from the days before illness stole it, steady, teasing, full of that quiet confidence. "When good finds you, Mel, it's because you walked where it could see you." She clutched the note, not out of greed for the money, but for the rare feeling that someone had truly seen her, past the uniform, past the job title, past the 1,000 little humiliations that came with working in a showroom where smiles were measured by the perceived size of a client's wallet. At the dealership, the morning began as it always did, with the drone of the espresso machine in the back office, the clatter of key fobs being rearranged, and Troy loudly recounting his big sale from the previous day as if the world should stop spinning to applaud him. Halpern was already in his glass office, leaning back in his leather chair, scrolling on his phone with the concentration of a surgeon. Melissa had just signed in when her desk phone lit up. Not the general line, her direct extension. That almost never rang. She picked it up, cautious. "Melissa Roberts?" a deep voice asked, the kind that carried its own quiet authority. "Yes? This is Alex from the Reeves Foundation." Melissa froze. The name alone felt like stepping into a different temperature. "Oh, good morning," she said, unsure if she was supposed to sound professional, casual, or some impossible mix of both. "I was asked to reach out to you directly," Alex continued. "Mr. Reeves mentioned you might be open to a conversation about a project he's working on. Something to do with transportation access for families in difficult situations." Melissa's mind stumbled over the words. Yes, of course. What kind of project?" "A community program, reliable, safe vehicles for people who need them most." Single parents, veterans, people working 2 jobs without the means to get to them. We're still in the planning phase, but Keanu insisted your perspective would be valuable. My perspective? She almost laughed. I'm not an executive or a designer or... Exactly, Alex said, his voice warm now. You're the kind of person who deals with real people every day, sees how they get treated, and knows the difference between a solution and a sales pitch. We need that. Melissa's throat tightened. It wasn't flattery. He said it like a fact. What would I have to do? Just meet him. He's in town for another week. We can arrange for you to stop by our office this evening after your shift. Or if you'd prefer somewhere more neutral. This evening, she said, quickly before she could talk herself out of it. When she hung up, the hum of the showroom sounded different, like static before a radio signal clears. She caught Troy watching her with mild suspicion, as if the call had violated some unspoken dealership hierarchy. Halpern opened his office door just far enough to bark, "Melissa, inventory check on the G-Class models! Now!" The morning ground. Forward. She moved through tasks, key counts, VIN confirmations, cross-checking spec sheets, while her mind played over the last 24 hours like a film reel. The test drive, the brake repair, the way he'd declined the handshake, not out of arrogance, but because he seemed to know when gestures were just theater. At lunch, she slipped into the break room with her mother's favorite soup in a small thermos. The last time she'd brought it to the care facility, her mother had smiled faintly, as if somewhere in the fog of her mind, flavor still reached her. Melissa promised herself she'd visit tonight after the meeting, even if it meant getting home late. The hours dragged until closing. Halpern left early for a dinner meeting, and Troy spent the last half hour schmoozing a walk-in couple, who clearly just wanted to browse. Melissa cleaned her desk, smoothed the note in her pocket, and caught the 6:20 bus toward a side of Los Angeles she rarely had reason to visit. The Reeves Foundation's office was nothing like the dealership. No gleaming floors, no aggressive lighting. The reception area was lined with framed photos, smiling children, rebuilt community centers, families standing beside freshly painted homes. A young man at the desk greeted her like a neighbor, rather, than a gatekeeper. "Melissa, he's just finishing a call. Please have a seat." She sat on a worn but comfortable couch, her eyes catching on one particular photo, a modest parking lot filled with donated cars, each with a big red bow. People stood beside them, tears and disbelief in their eyes. She realized with a slow swell of awe that this was exactly what Alex had been talking about. When Keanu appeared, he wasn't flanked by assistants or carrying a stack of papers. He wore a simple black shirt, sleeves pushed up, and the same unassuming demeanor she'd seen in the showroom. "Melissa," he said, smiling in that quiet, earnest way that made you feel he'd been genuinely looking forward to seeing you. "Thanks for coming." "I should be thanking you," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "For what?" She almost mentioned the envelope, but stopped. He hadn't signed it for recognition. "For yesterday. For making it matter." He gestured toward the office beyond. "Let's make today matter, too." They sat at a round table, no desk between them. Alex joined them briefly to set down coffee and a thin folder labeled Project Open Roads. Inside were early sketches of the program, a plan to acquire and refurbish reliable vehicles, pair them with driving safety courses, and place them with people chosen not by credit score, but by need and determination. "You see people at their most defensive," Keanu said. "We want them at their most hopeful, and I think you know the difference." Melissa traced a finger over one of the printed outlines. This could change things for so many. But you'll need more than mechanics. You'll need someone who can read the room before the room reads them." He nodded slowly. "Exactly." She looked up. "You're asking me to help you." "With this?" "I'm asking you to teach me what you already know," he said simply. Melissa felt something in her chest, something she'd kept guarded for years, begin to lean toward the light. She didn't know yet how, or if, she could juggle this with her job, her mother's care, her life as it was. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She was already in. What neither of them realized in that moment was that their work together would take them far beyond a charity program, far beyond the dealership, into the kind of fight that tests not just resources, but the raw, stubborn strength of the human spirit. And it would all start with one unexpected name on the program's first applicant list, a name Melissa knew far too well. The first 2 weeks at the Reeves Foundation passed like a blur for Melissa. She hadn't quit the dealership yet. Keanu insisted she keep her steady income until the project had legs. But her evenings now belonged to Project Open Roads. By day, she navigated the polished minefields of the showroom, fending off Troy's passive-aggressive barbs and Halpern's smirking advice. And by night, she sat at the round table in the Foundation's modest office, sifting through applications with Alex, drafting outreach letters and sketching ideas for how to make car donations feel like celebrations instead of handouts. Keanu came in most nights, never sweeping in like a benefactor, but quietly joining them, coffee in hand, listening more than he spoke. Sometimes he'd offer a story, a neighbor from his youth who rebuilt cars for single moms, or a stranger who once helped him fix a flat in the rain without asking who he was. Other times he'd lean back and let Melissa's voice fill the room, her ideas pouring out like a dam had cracked. It was on the third Thursday, just past 9 p.m., that Melissa's world tilted. She was working through the newest stack of applications, red pen in hand, checking for the basics. Proof of need, valid license, no history of unsafe driving. She'd gotten used to stories that cut deep. A father sleeping in his car between warehouse shifts, a nurse walking 2 miles to the bus stop after 12-hour nights, a young woman sharing a ride with 3 co-workers because none of them could afford repairs on their clunkers. She flipped to the next application and froze. Handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, slanted letters that stabbed the page as if each stroke were a grudge. The name at the top confirmed it. Troy Matthews. Her first reaction was disbelief, followed fast by something sharper. She checked the address. It wasn't fake. He lived in a high-rise barely 3 blocks from the dealership. The income section, however, was blank except for the words private sales, commission-based. Under reason for application, he'd written, vehicle repossessed after unexpected financial hardship. Need reliable car to secure new sales position. Melissa's jaw tightened. She could almost hear his voice, the oily cadence he used when selling both cars and himself. The same man who had sneered at Keanu in a soaked jacket, who'd sized her up daily like she was furniture the showroom tolerated only because it matched the decor, was now here, hat in hand, asking for the same. Help he would have denied others without blinking. Keanu was across the table, reading another file. He glanced up at the sudden stillness in her posture. Something wrong? She hesitated. It's someone I know. He set his folder down. That can happen. This is a small city when you look past the skyline. No, she said slowly. This is someone I really know. She slid the application toward him. His eyes flicked over the name, then back to her. Dealership? She nodded. He's not the kind of person who believes in programs like this. I've heard him say things, ugly things, about people who ask for help. Yesterday he made a joke about our brake repair woman, called her charity case in chief. Keanu leaned back, thoughtful. And now he's here. Now he's here, she repeated, bitterness creeping in despite herself. If I followed our criteria, I'd flag this for review. No proof of income, vague hardship details, but part of me... She trailed off, ashamed of the rest of that sentence. Part of you wants to say no, Keanu finished for her, not accusing, just naming the weight. Melissa exhaled. Yes, because I know he wouldn't hesitate to say no to anyone else, especially me. Silence pooled between them. Alex, sensing the moment, excused himself to refill the coffee pot. Keanu's voice, when it came, was quiet but edged with conviction. If we only help people who've never hurt us, we'll miss half the ones who need it. And sometimes the help changes more than the need, it changes the person. Melissa's first instinct was to argue, but she remembered the woman with the broken brakes. She remembered how her own mother had taught her that dignity wasn't about who deserved kindness, it was about who needed it. Still, this was different. This wasn't a stranger. This was a man who'd stood inches from her and dismissed her, who'd turned her humanity into an inconvenience. What if he sees it as weakness? She asked. Then that's on him, Keanu said. What he does with the gift is his reflection. What we choose to give is ours. She stared at the application, the black ink of his name, the arrogant tilt of his handwriting. You'd approve this? I'd treat it like every other one, he said. But I'd also make sure the handover is enlightening. Enlightening? He smiled faintly. Sometimes the most humbling moments are the ones where the ground you thought you owned turns out to be borrowed. They left the decision. Pending agreeing to verify his situation, Alex would check the repossession record and confirm whether Troy's claim had weight. Melissa went home that night with the folder in her bag, as if proximity would help her make peace with it. The next day at the dealership, Troy was unusually subdued. No flashy retelling of big sales, no smug glances in her direction. He spent most of the morning on his phone, pacing near the SUV section. Melissa couldn't help wondering if that phone call was about the program, or about whatever had driven him to it. By noon, the temptation to confront him was a live wire in her chest. She imagined dropping the application on the glossy hood of a showroom car and watching his expression collapse. But then she thought of Keanu's words, of the kind of program they were building. If we only help people who've never hurt us. That evening, Alex called with the verification. Repo checks out, he said. 3 months behind on payments. Commission job fell through. No savings. Melissa swallowed. So he qualifies. He qualifies, Alex confirmed. Keanu says you should be there when we hand him the keys, if he accepts. If he accepts. Alex chuckled softly. Some people can't take help without a fight. Melissa hung up and sat at her kitchen table, staring at the city beyond her window. The lights blinked in their glass towers like indifferent stars. Somewhere out there, Troy was probably telling himself a story that made him the victim, the exception, the misunderstood. She wondered if he'd ever told himself a story where he wasn't the hero. In 3 days, she would find out. What Melissa didn't know yet was that the handover wouldn't go the way anyone expected. That keys would change hands, yes, but not before a conversation in the Foundation's parking lot would strip away years of carefully built pride, leaving only the raw truth between two people who had spent too long pretending they couldn't see each other. The Foundation's lot wasn't large, just enough room for a dozen vehicles and a portable canopy they used for donation events. But on Saturday morning, it felt like the center of a much bigger stage. The sky was a washed-out silver, the air, carrying that faint metallic tang that always hinted at rain, though none had yet fallen. Volunteers were busy moving folding chairs, setting up a coffee table with paper cups, and draping a banner that read, Project Open Roads, Every Journey Deserves a Start. Melissa arrived early, not because she had to, but because she couldn't bring herself to walk in late and see him already there. She wanted time to steady herself, to get used to the idea that in less than an hour, she'd be handing a set of keys to the man who had spent the better part of a year making her life at the dealership feel like a balancing act between invisibility and self-defense. Keanu was there too, in his quiet way. No entourage, just a travel mug of coffee in one hand and a checklist in the other. He was wearing the same black jacket she remembered from the rainy day in the showroom. Somehow, seeing him grounded her. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She hesitated, then asked, "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure about the mission," he replied. "As for the man, well, we'll see what kind of road he's ready to take." By 10 o'clock, a small crowd had gathered. Recipients, their families, a few local journalists, and some curious onlookers from nearby shops. The first two recipients were straightforward. A single mother who'd been walking 3 miles to work each day, and a retired mechanic who'd lost his tools and his truck in a fire. Their gratitude was open, unguarded. They shook hands, posed for photos, and drove away with tears still shining in their eyes. Then it was Troy's turn. He arrived not in the confident strut Melissa had braced for, but with a kind of stiffness in his shoulders, as though every step toward the canopy cost him something he wasn't sure he could spare. He wore a blazer, navy, with a faint pinstripe, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. He scanned the small crowd, his eyes catching hers for half a second before flicking away. Alex stepped forward with the manila folder. "Troy Matthews, this is your day," he announced. "You've qualified for the program's first phase. Congratulations." Troy nodded, but his mouth stayed tight. No smile. Keanu motioned toward the car, a dark gray sedan, freshly detailed, the kind of vehicle that blended into any city street but had enough reliability to outlast the next 5 years of a careful driver's life. Melissa held the keys. She was supposed to say a few words, something about the program's commitment to dignity and opportunity. Instead, what came out was quieter, more deliberate. "This car is more than a set of wheels," she said. "It's time you get back. It's doors that open instead of close. We hope you'll use it well." She stepped forward, keys in hand. Troy took them, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest instant. And for that heartbeat, there was no dealership, no past, just the awkward truth that they were now part of the same story. But instead of walking to the driver's seat, Troy cleared his throat. "Before I take this," he began, his voice lower than she'd ever heard it in the showroom. "I need to say something." The crowd quieted. Keanu tilted his head slightly, curious. Troy looked at Melissa, not with the smirk she knew so well, but with something closer to weariness. "I used to think people who got help like this were taking the easy way. I thought needing anything meant you'd failed somewhere along the line. I said some things." He stopped, exhaled. "No. I meant some things that I see now were wrong." Melissa stood still, feeling the weight of every unsaid moment between them. "I lost my car because I made bad calls," he went on. "Chased commissions instead of stability. Thought I was too good to plan for the bad months. Then one day, it all caught up. And suddenly I was the guy walking in the rain, getting looked at like I didn't belong." His gaze flicked to Keanu, for a moment, then back to her. "You know what that feels like." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. "I'm not here to beg," Troy said. "I'm here because someone decided my mistakes didn't disqualify me from starting over. That's more grace than I've given anyone, including you." He shifted his weight, almost imperceptibly. "I can't erase the way I've treated you, but I can tell you it came from my own insecurity, not anything you did. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." The apology wasn't polished. It wasn't the kind of thing that could be rehearsed. But it landed. Not because it was perfect, but because it was imperfect in exactly the way truth often is. Uneven. A little. Raw, unshielded by charm. Melissa felt something inside her loosen. Not forgiveness exactly, but the first space where it might eventually grow. Keanu stepped forward, his voice carrying without raising it. "Second chances aren't about erasing the past. They're about writing the next chapter differently. We're trusting you to do that." Troy nodded once, and this time when he walked toward the car, it was with a steadier step. As the engine started and the gray sedan rolled out of the lot, Melissa realized she wasn't watching an enemy leave. She was watching a man carry both his past and his possibility in the same set of hands. But the morning wasn't over. Because just as the next recipient approached the canopy, a black SUV pulled to the curb and idled there. The tinted passenger. Window slid down halfway, and Melissa saw the unmistakable profile of Halpern, the dealership's general manager, leaning slightly into the sunlight. He was watching her, a faint, knowing smile on his face, as if he had just arrived with a story of his own to tell, and it might not be one she wanted aired. The moment Melissa saw Halpern's smirk through the half-lowered SUV window, the air in the Foundation's lot seemed to thin. The happy chatter from the last handover dimmed into a background hum, and all she could hear was the soft purr of his engine. She'd seen that look before, at the dealership, when he'd discovered a small mistake she'd made in paperwork and stretched it into a sermon about professional standards in front of the entire sales team. That same curve of the lips, part amusement, part threat. He didn't move right away. He let the silence work for him, as he always did, forcing others to break it first. Melissa's stomach knotted, but before she could speak, Keanu stepped slightly forward, placing himself at a casual angle between her and the SUV, as if they were simply having a conversation and the world outside didn't matter. Beautiful. Day for a handover event, Halpern finally said, his voice carrying that smug drawl that made every sentence sound like a setup. Melissa managed to keep her tone level. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, I was in the neighborhood," Halpern replied, feigning casual interest. "Heard some interesting chatter from a mutual acquaintance. Thought I'd see for myself." His gaze swept over the banner, the small crowd, the row of vehicles. "Quite the operation you've got here. Very philanthropic." Keanu's expression didn't change, but there was a stillness in him now, like a man bracing for an incoming wave. "If you came to congratulate us, you can leave the suspense behind," he said evenly. Halpern's eyes glittered. "Not exactly. Congratulations. More curiosity. You see, I understand one of your recipients today is a former employee of mine. A certain Mr. Matthews?" Melissa's pulse kicked hard. Of course Troy would have talked. But what game was Halpern playing? "Yes," she said cautiously. Halpern leaned a fraction closer to his open window. "Fascinating choice. Did you know that while he worked for me, he managed to sell cars at record margins? Could have been one of the best, if he'd learned when to shut his mouth, and when you start rewarding people who don't deserve it." His gaze locked on Melissa. "You risk encouraging bad habits." A dozen responses crowded her throat, but before she could choose one, Keanu spoke, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable steel. "You mean the kind of habits that judge people by their lowest moment instead of their potential?" Halpern laughed softly. "Potential doesn't pay bills. Results do. I run a business, not a charity." Keanu took a step closer to the SUV, his hands relaxed at his sides. "And yet here you are, uninvited, at a charity event, critiquing the decisions of people actually doing the work. Curious business move." The smirk faltered, just for a heartbeat, before Halpern recovered. "I'm just saying, people remember where they came from. Don't think the dealership won't be part of your story, Melissa. Or his." He tilted his head toward the street Troy had driven down minutes before. Melissa realized then what this was. A warning. Halpern wasn't here for Troy. He was here for her. To remind her that she was still in his orbit, that her future could be made uncomfortable if she embarrassed the wrong people. Keanu caught her eye. A brief glance that asked without words, "Do you want me to handle this?" She drew a steadying breath. "Mr. Halpern," she said, her voice clear enough for a few nearby volunteers to turn and listen, "I do remember where I came from. I remember working under someone who thought kindness was a liability and only saw value in what could be sold. and I remember deciding that wasn't the kind of life I wanted to build. So yes, this will be part of my story, just not in the way you think. For a moment, there was no sound but the low idle of the SUV. Halpern's eyes narrowed, but he didn't interrupt. Keanu stepped in again, his tone almost conversational, but edged with something that made every word land like a quiet verdict. The difference between you and us, Halpern, is simple. You measure people by the deal you can get out of them. We measure them by the road they can take if given the keys. A ripple moved through the onlookers. Halpern's jaw flexed once before he leaned back in his seat. "Well," he said, his voice cooler now, "I hope your road stays smooth. We'll see how long that lasts." The tinted window slid up, severing the line of sight, and the SUV pulled away without hurry, as if even in retreat he wanted to suggest control. Melissa let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Keanu glanced at her, a hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "You didn't need me to handle it," he said. "I've been waiting a long time to say something like that," she admitted, feeling both lighter and strangely steady. Thati. Event wrapped soon after, the remaining recipients driving off into the gray afternoon, each with their own quiet victories ahead. As the volunteers folded chairs and packed away the banner, Keanu walked over, holding a clipboard with the next week's schedule. "We've got more cars coming in," he said, "and more names on the list. This is just the start." Melissa nodded, her eyes on the empty spot where Troy's car had been minutes ago. "You think he'll make good on it?" Keanu looked toward the street, his gaze distant but hopeful. "I think he's got a better chance now than he did yesterday, and sometimes that's all anyone needs." She stood there for a moment longer, the cool air brushing her face, before turning back to help pack up. The lot was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes not from absence, but from the settling of something important. For the first time in years, Melissa felt like her life wasn't something happening to her. It was something she was driving, and somewhere out there, a man who once dismissed her was learning the same lesson.